Welcome back to Intersection. It's a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Ryan Famulner, and today we're joined in studio by MU Chancellor Brady Deaton and MU Provost Foster. Both are retiring from their positions, Deaton later this month and Foster at the end of the year. We're talking about the successes and struggles as they led the university over most of the last decade, and talking about the future of the university today. We won't be able to take questions from the audience as we usually do today because we were not able to schedule this conversation during a time that the show could be broadcast live. The first half was, we got to a lot of interesting topics. I think one thing that's probably worth exploring too was actually what we talked about in our last show on Intersection. I'd like to maybe get your thoughts on this. We talked a lot about luxury student housing downtown in Columbia and what that means for students and for the city. Obviously, that's not completely in control of the university because a lot of that is private development. But what are your thoughts on that development in the city, something that's been happening the last couple of years, and what that means for the town and the university?
Well, it certainly led to significant growth in construction for the city, and to some extent that's always healthy, and to some extent, of course, it places real pressure on the public service delivery of the city as a whole. But we've had significant growth, of course, in student numbers, about a third over the time period we've been talking about here, a decade or so. And at the same time, interestingly, the demand for on-campus housing has just increased significantly. And that's something I think wasn't perhaps totally anticipated. Students simply want to be on campus, and there's good reasons for that. The campus is beautiful. It's improved so many aspects of housing on the campus has improved also. And the social organization of the students, I think, has changed with the success of the FIGs, freshman interest groups, and other coalition building that's occurred, the inclusiveness, the one Mizzou concept the students have gotten so much behind. So parents, when we talk to parents, they often will talk about, and this is true of international students also, they want their children to live on campus because it's considered safe and so forth. At the same time then, we've had the huge investments in housing across the city of Columbia and the county, Boone County, and by investors from all over, and that gives enormous options, and with our growth, we've been renting 1 or 2 units every year recently to provide additional housing for our students directly that then we get involved in working with private investors and in providing that housing. But it's important to mention, and again, it's important that the town-gown relationships be good and dialogue be kept up so that we're aware of what's happening and that we can work with the city and the county to have the kind of transportation system we need, the public safety issues can be addressed, and so forth.
It's a complicated issue. Our freshmen are required to live on campus, and one of our biggest assets is that MU is a really powerful community. People really have come together, and they relate to the community strongly, emotionally even, and So that's the on-campus housing. It really fosters that, but you want to keep that going afterwards. And I think having these especially downtown housing units actually helps foster that strength of community and keep it going. And of course, having good housing is really important for getting students to want to come here. And
sure.
So.
Yeah, very much so.
And your conversation is mirroring a lot of what we talked about, especially transportation as far as the town-gown relationship goes. One thing that we had someone who had written a book, not about Missouri, but about this phenomenon of luxury housing in colleges around the country. And one of the concerns she had from her research was the idea that some students are, when they move into these housing that is kind of a somewhat party atmosphere, that type of thing, that the studies all of a sudden may go astray. Because on the university housing, of course, there are FIGs, there are classroom setting orientation things that can help focus on academics in your living situation. That's a little bit out of the control of the university in these private settings. Is that a concern?
It is a concern, and because we want to promote a learning atmosphere, that a creative and process and a culture that Provost Foster emphasized so much. I think it's a very important point. And we want to promote that in a way that really enhances learning and commitment and the kind of values that we believe in as a university. And other forces threaten that. And in fact, the term luxury housing that you've used is important to recognize that our students here at the University of Missouri are probably a relatively higher income standard than the average of the state. And that's a concern itself, because as a university, we want to be open and accessible by all socioeconomic groups in society. And that's a real challenge. We have some brilliant, very low-income students in this state. We should be sure they are aspiring to have the kind of education we provide and finding ways to do it. And Provost Foster and I have spent a lot of time talking about this because we both believe that very strongly. And it's easy to say, and it's extremely difficult in today's environment to carry off. And we've had the thought that we should be developing housing, sort of minimal housing for the low-income student, not to typecast them, but to give them the option. If this is all you can afford, by golly, we'll provide it. And we will support it and nurture the learning environment around that. So I know that Dr. Kathy Scroggs, the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, has that issue under serious consideration right now.
But it's not new that many students live off campus. That's not a new development. Sure. Most students have lived off campus for a long time.
Sure. So. And it's interesting you brought up, because that was also one of the main points of that author, was that the class divide element of that is also an interesting aspect, because that housing, again, there's only a certain person that can live in that housing. It almost helps perpetuate a class divide on campus. Right. I mean, because that's the people you're interacting with, the people that you live with, right? In a dorm setting, you're living with everybody. Right. In these, you're not. So, you know, what initiatives? I guess, what initiatives are you trying to do on campus as far as getting those diverse environments still exist, especially for upperclassmen? Because freshmen, you're going to have to live on dorms, but.
Well, I know we've tried to give attention to the transfer student issue and developing FIG. We have FIGs that are freshman interest groups that are developed, not freshmen, for upper level groups to come together as a community, bringing people from the broader off-campus housing into relationships with those who live on campus, although most upper class students don't live on campus, they live in the city. But we've tried to do things to bring them into the campus, and I would suspect that not nearly as aggressive there as we could benefit from if we could devote more resources to that.
I'm not certain what the number is. I'm not just making it up, but it's sure. I don't remember the exact number, but we have hundreds. I think it's in the 700s of student organizations on campus. And these are a very important piece of this community I was talking about. But I think the downtown is an important piece of it. The restaurants and the theaters and ragtag, and I mean there are a lot of things that bring people together that aren't just on campus, and they're an important part of the campus, the richness of the campus life, I have to say.
Good point.
Okay. Well, moving on again, we actually did get a question, despite the fact that we aren't live this week. We put out a call to some of our former guests to ask if they had questions. And Mary Beck, who is actually a law professor here at the university, sent us a question asking why you both stayed on so long at the university. Past retirement age, what made you stay here this long?
Well, let me say I'm not sure what retirement age is anymore. Last week I was in a conversation with a lawyer in Houston, and I said something about the 70s as maybe a time to think about things a little differently. He was very surprised. Of course, I was talking to a peer age-wise. He was like, "Well, so what's new about that? You know, my gosh, we're all charging away." And let me just add that being in the White House earlier this year with Fred Hawthorne, one of our chemistry professors who's a member of the National Academy, he got the National Medal of Science that President Obama presented to him, along with several I think there were 12 others in the nation that got the award. But many of them knew each other and were colleagues of Professor Hawthorne, and there were several in the age range of between, let me say, to put it broadly, 85 and 95, all still going 90 miles an hour, doing extremely well. So. The age factor is for retirement is, I think, a thing of the past to a great extent. So that therefore you're looking at all that you're doing and how much you've put into a job and where you want to go from here. And for me, I had, there were family aspects of my family I wanted to spend more time on. There were aspects of my appointed role on BIFAD, Board for International Food and Ag Development, I wanted to spend more time on. Then I wanted to focus on fewer items and do less of the day-to-day administrative work, quite honestly. So it just came for me. It came very naturally at a point where I just wanted to do things a bit differently.
I came to higher ed as a first-generation student, and my dad quit school in 7th grade. I went to undergraduate school in my late 20s. I had no idea what higher ed meant, really, and it opened up a life for me that I could never have imagined. I'm really passionate about it. So why did I stay on? It's something I'm passionate about, and I really want to try to make a difference, and it's satisfying to me, and so all of that together is it was not a hard decision to stay on.
I would add the thought of staying on, as I say,
Yeah.
was I never thought of it as staying on. I was just doing what came
Yeah.
naturally, and I had a similar background, and neither of my parents. My father went through high school, my mother 8th grade, and no one in our family had gone on to university, and so this was a new experience. And as Brian said, it opened up a whole world. It was very exciting, very stimulating, and I think both Brian and I are as stimulated today as we were when we started this process. It's a
Right.
very exciting process.
And one of the aspect about it, though, you guys, you're both leaving at the same time. We have a couple other people that are nearly the same time, a couple other
Right.
top administrators that are leaving. For the short-term future of the university, do you have any concerns? What would you tell your successors? And what are your concerns as that it really is going to be a bigger period of change than we've seen in some time here at the university?
I think you could really overestimate the amount of change that we're going to see. This is a very large, robust organization with enormous amount of momentum moving forward, and the momentum comes from high quality people, high quality programs, and I don't think even if somebody came in and wanted to make fundamental big rapid changes, I don't think they could, number one. But number two, I don't think they'd want to, because this is a wonderful place, and it, so I don't find that to be a big
I agree.
concern.
It's the strength of the faculty and the organizational processes in the university and the structures there with deans and chairs that keep the university going.
Right.
And that's why you can make changes at the top without much fear of losing the real strength that you have as a university. Every generation of leaders have certain imprints that they will work toward and lead towards change that hopefully gets it better and better all the time. That's what we want for our successors. And I have no doubt that there will be effective leadership continuing, and we'll see things just continue to prosper for the university.
But as we've said, we've seen also there are fundamental changes that are happening that are just going to be coming
Right.
for higher ed broadly, and of course the new leadership has to be
Right.
on top of all of that and bringing all of that in to MU in a functional and valuable way. But so there will be change, but it's not going to be change because the four of us are leaving. It's
Right.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I'm going to throw out there, because, again, I work on campus, and I think because it's been such a big shift naturally, I think there's some speculation. And the speculation I have heard from some is that some or all of you may have been pushed out, forced out, something like that. What would you say to that type of speculation? You've already talked a little bit, Chancellor Deaton, about your motivations for retiring.
Well, I'd say if that were the case, we've not felt it, let me say.
Okay.
No, these are very natural processes of change that are underway here, and us looking at our professional and personal lives generally.
I think you have four people leaving for four very different kinds of reasons that just happen to come together at the same time. I don't see any common dynamic.
Right, it
here at all.
wasn't planned at all. In fact,
No.
in fact, we were sort of surprised ourselves as it evolved, but it was just the nature of we've had a team that certainly worked very closely and well together, but in different ways, and that team continues, whether that person, as Provost said earlier, whether that person is carrying it out or someone that was working in the organization now is in the interim position pushing it, and new leadership will come in and the organization will continue to go forward.
I've been at quite a few universities, and one of the things about the leadership here that I think is an incredibly valuable asset for the university is the incredible integration of all of the upper administration. And our provost staff and the chancellor's staff, for instance, have a big overlap of membership. And there's never an academic discussion that doesn't have facilities people and financial people and IT people and
Athletic
enrollment
people,
management,
it cuts across
athletic
all
people.
dimensions.
It's all together in a very robust way, and we have a culture where people can come together and really talk with one another in a challenge one another and have real discussions and leave friends. And it's a great culture.
And that, we talk to colleagues, and not saying anything about other universities, but I think this is a bit rare here.
I think so, too.
It's not been by accident. It's been very much by design. Provost Foster and I we sort of designed the overlap as well as we could, and we've had tremendous cooperation from all dimensions of the university. And this is why I feel that things have moved so smoothly and so effectively, and under very difficult and trying times. These have not been easy times the last 10, 15 years, economically, financially, demographically for the university. But with the kind of commitment that Brian talked about, we've just had an absolute ironclad commitment to move ahead and do better. And we've laid it out all on the table. We've done the best we could. We've disagreed at times, but then we've made decisions and gone on with them.
Sure. I'll take one moment to remind our audience that this is Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Ryan Famulner, and today we're joined in studio by MU Chancellor Brady Deaton and MU Provost Brian Foster. Both are retiring from their positions, Deaton later this month and Foster at the end of the year. We're talking about the successes and struggles as they led the university over the last decade and talking about the future of the university. We won't be able to take questions from the audience as we usually do today because we were not able to schedule this conversation during a time that the show could be broadcast live. We've talked a lot about the fact that your successors are going to be taking over a much different university in many ways than when you took over. Each of you took over your roles here. So what would you what's going to be your first piece of advice, I guess, to your successor?
Well, let me say, I'll speak for myself, but I expect it'll be shared by the provost. We only give advice if asked, because I think one of our commitments are to make sure we do not interfere with fresh leadership coming in with new ideas and ways of doing things. And
Right.
we don't want to be in a position of naysaying or even
Sure.
adding to or biasing. So
Okay, so how about this?
We're resources, and we think.
Amen. I think that's a really important.
Sure. So let's rephrase it then. I'll ask, what are the biggest challenge? What will be the biggest challenge that you think for administrators, maybe not your successor, but administrators as you leave the university?
I think the balance, I would just start out as saying the balance that Provost talked about earlier is very important to get a sense of the various dimensions of the revenue side, the cost side, and then becoming familiar with the faculty strengths that we have in various ways, and then looking at strategies to pull that together. I mean, that's what a new set of leaders will do here.
I think one of the most important things for the new leader is to really get in tune with the local culture. We have a very strong community, like we said earlier. This is a very robust organization, and to come to understand all of that culture, that community, is going to be an important part of being effective. And I think that's a very important beginning step.
Absolutely.
One relationship we haven't talked a lot about in this show so far is the university's relationship to the university system as a whole. I wonder your thoughts on the direction of the university system as a whole, and whether you like that direction of where things are going as amongst the four campus system.
I think we've had in recent years very, very powerful support from our board of curators, and the university as a system is getting stronger. We've all been participants and partners in that process as we work with our colleagues on the other campuses. So it's been very much of an engaged process, and when one has to look at a system like ours as part of an overall state system of higher education that includes the other four-year institutions out there that we work with through COFE, also the Council on Public Higher Education, and with the Coordinating Board on Higher Education and Commissioner David Russell. So I think there's been about as close a relationship, certainly as I've ever seen in the history here. And I think we feel positive about that. We feel that it'll serve the state effectively. And we're going to continue to, this campus will continue to be a very active participant in that process.
Just to go a little bit higher level perspective on this, I think one of the big assets of the system is that the four campuses are incredibly different. And there are ways to bring the four campuses together, I think, so that we can do things together that we can't do alone. That's one thing. The other thing is the system does some fabulous management of our resources, like our endowments and the retirement system. And those are things that are much better done in the system rather than campus by campus. It's much more efficient. The IT services. So I think there's a lot of very positive contribution from the system.
Mm-hmm. Some of the decisions the Board of Curators makes also will affect the campuses on, especially their ability to attract top faculty, right? For instance, I mean, in the last couple of years, we saw a shift in retirement benefits. Not that that's the first thing every faculty member is looking at, but do you think, what is the setup now? How confident are you that we can attract top faculty at specifically this campus, especially given the system we're put into?
Well, I think we're in a very strong position to attract top faculty, and that's not to take away from any of the challenges. I mean, the challenges basically being resources. Mm-hmm. This culture here is very attractive to faculty because we're trying to nurture scholarly excellence. And we have leadership system-wide that supports that. President Wolf is a product of this university. He's native of Columbia. He's bringing tremendous business expertise to the role. We've hired new leadership in other positions that are very familiar with the strength of a powerful statewide research university. Hank Foley, the Vice President for Research and Academic
He's a great
Affairs,
addition to the system.
comes from Penn State system. And so we've got an entire system that is sensitive to the kind of dimensions needed. So we fully expect that system to be very supportive of the drive to excellence of this campus, the University MU. And MU as the AAU university, that's an important brand for attracting some of the nation's top faculty. And there's been reflected in the system and the support for excellence in that regard, for building the kind of infrastructure we need, and for hiring the kind of faculty that we need. So
The fact is, we are hiring outstanding faculty. I mean, the timing of the question is kind of interesting. 2 days ago, Brady had a reception at his house for the new faculty, and I was blown away.
Oh,
I mean,
wasn't it phenomenal?
Incredible people.
80 some new faculty were with us, and it was just an absolute love fest of intellectual greatness, because we've got people from every major university, and not only in this nation but in the world here at MU, and they're excited about what's happening. You could feel it, the electricity in the air.
I think that's not an exaggeration. It was an exciting evening. It was wonderful.
And that's what attracts top faculty. And that word needs to go out. That's what we've worked hard at, really. Get that word out there, keep it in front of the professions that we have in the various universities across the country. They will then send their best students to the University of Missouri.
That's right.
So much to talk about, so forgive me for jumping around. Another thing we wanted to talk about that's been a phenomenon seen many places around the country is the role of adjuncts on campuses. What's the situation here at the university? Have we seen a shift, as many others have, to more adjunct use, or and what purpose do they serve? I guess
I'd
in the overall
avoid
mission?
using that term.
Okay.
Okay. Because the term has sort of has some negative connotations, and what we have, I think, is we're national leaders in how we have put together a system for ranked non-tenure track faculty who are outstanding people, just fabulous people. And they go through much of the same kind of evaluation for promotion as do the tenured faculty. And yes, we've increased that number of people, but these are people that are specialized in research or in clinical services or in teaching or other kinds of things, in journalism, the faculty of practice. And I think we're national leaders in doing this the right way.
Yeah.
And now they're integrated fully into faculty governance and ways that
that's an important step that's been taken here, and I just agree totally with what Brian is saying. If you look at some of the best universities in this nation, you will find this pattern now being carried out.
Sure. Yeah. Full disclosure, I'm an adjunct here.
Okay.
The journalism school, there are many adjunct faculty members.
And see, we didn't know that.
Sure.
and neither do most faculty. We work with each other as faculty, and that's very important. Part of the culture.
Sure.
One of my favorite examples of how well we have kind of accommodated the diversity of different kinds of faculty is that for 3 years now, the chair of the Academic Affairs Committee of Faculty Council has been a non-tenure track faculty member. And I think that's wonderful.
It's quite remarkable, really.
Yeah.
Again, jumping to another question, we talked about research funding in the first half of the show as well, but we didn't talk a lot, or research rather, we didn't talk a lot about the funding aspect of it. What advice would you give, or I shouldn't say that, but what's the situation on research funding now, and what are the challenges going to be in the future?
I just wanted to say, because I just came from the AAU meeting of presidents and chancellors, and the major topic was federal funding of research. And the picture is changing with the sequestrations we've seen in budget reductions. So federal funding has been under we've had significant growth in research now for quite some time, but it's pretty flat, if not even slightly negative right now in the last year, just due to the changes that are occurring at the federal level that are really, really hurting us. So there's a major challenge here to draw on. You only get research funding if you've got great faculty, though, and then building great relationships.
There are other elements, too, that have changed. I mean, earmarks disappeared a few years ago. So certain kinds of targeted funding have taken different forms now. I mean, it's not like there's no targeted funding anymore. There still is and has to be, but it doesn't have that older earmark kind of process. And so there are changes all over the place. It's really something we have to adapt to. And
in fact, what used to come, to make Brian's point, what used to come as formula funds and say the land grant system is now shifting very heavily toward competitive funds. And fortunately, we do very well in that regard. But for many universities, that's a big shift, and they aren't getting the money that they had earlier. So it's all changing, and we have to adapt. And so the future leadership will be aware of that without question. I'm very confident of that. And building the coalitions and on this campus to be effective in pursuing the external funding and building new partnerships with private sector and foundations and other agencies of government, these all, and internationally even with the different international organizations in other countries, all become very important ingredients of how we continue to develop excellence in research.
partnerships very broadly are absolutely critical in this environment.
We only have a couple minutes left in the show, and I definitely want to throw this question out. What is next for each of you? You've talked a little bit about your involvement, Chancellor Deaton, but maybe just expand a little bit on that.
Right, and the board created an institute devoted to international relationships of universities that I'll be working on with my wife also, looking at issues of food security, health, nutrition, internationally on a half-time basis. And then with BIFAD being the International Board on Food and Agricultural Development, where I will, and these are all very closely related, we'll be spending a good deal of time, that and grandchildren.
Right, yeah. Well, could you tell me a little bit more quickly just about that, the Institute for University Leadership? Is that going to be specifically talking about University of Missouri or the higher education system as a whole?
It'll be positioned here at the University of Missouri, but it'll be in addressing higher education generally across the country and indeed around the world. As both Brian and I have been working with other universities around the world all of our careers, basically, and we want to make sure those relationships can be developed in an optimal way to tap the best that we're doing here, from a scholarly standpoint, and linking with what other universities are doing.
Provost Foster, what about you? What are you doing
I'll be
now?
working part-time, quarter-time on projects for the Chancellor, the Provost, but I'm an anthropologist, and I'm very interested in higher ed, passionate about it, as I said, and I'd like to do a lot of research on higher education from an anthropological perspective, trying to understand how the different academic disciplines, interact, to how students from different socioeconomic sectors navigate the system, and our rituals and all the different things that anthropologists are interested in. Higher education provides a very rich subject matter.
Laboratory.
Okay. Well, that is all the time we have for today's Intersection. I want to thank very much to our guests, MU Chancellor Brady Deaton and MU Provost Brian Foster. We'd like to remind those of you enjoying this as a rebroadcast that Intersection takes place live for a full hour from 2 to 3 every Monday afternoon. You can watch live streaming video of our program each Monday afternoon online at kbia.org. Alongside that video, you can submit your questions and comments and take part in an online discussion with others in the audience. You'll also find an archive of all of our past programs, including the full hour of today's conversation. Intersection is a broadcast from the Reynolds Journalism Institute and is a project of RJI and KBIA. Intersection is produced by Raymond Tungakar, Janet Saidi, and Ruben Sturm. Travis McMillan is our technical director with production assistance from Saifon Oyung, Casey Morell, and Andrew Yost. Pat Akers is our audio producer. Executive directors are Mike Dunn and Mike McKean. And I'm Ryan Famuliner. Thanks for joining us today, and have a great week. Thank you.